Good afternoon, ladies and gents. This is part one of a two-part video session, understanding possible threats to the United Kingdom if all hell breaks loose in Europe. In part two of this session, I will be showing you how to use Nuke Map, which is an online application. We will be able to simulate nuclear detonations here in the UK over various counter-force and counter-value targets to see what impact that would have on you if you live in or anywhere near any of those locations. But before I start, I just want to sort of run through a quick disclaimer. I do not work for the government, intelligence, the military, or any other significant agency whereby one could have access to confidential data concerning any war or conflict currently sort of in motion, and that could sort of affect the United Kingdom, its critical infrastructure, and the British population. So with that, the information outlined in this video will only be based on news, articles, and facts published sort of out onto the public domain. And my views, comments, advice, help, and any sort of information provided in this content will be based on speculation. Guys, I don't know if there's going to be an all-out war in Europe. Or any other sort of war theatre discussed in up and coming sort of videos. I will be pointing out possible threats. I mean possible in capital letters, threats to the UK as a whole from an enemy. And the reason for me providing this content is because I do believe that we, as in England and the NATO alliance, are kind of on the brink of war with Russia right now. Now, that situation could mean many different things, different scenarios and different outcomes. If war kicks off in Europe, then, everyone living in the UK will feel the effects, whether that's going to be economical, financial, psychologically, or even physically. So buckle up as we're sort of going to be, this video is going to be quite long. And we're going to be talking about the risks to, the UK as a country due to the war and conflict sort of kicking off around the world right now. We will talk about the risks and threats in terms of attacks on the UK from an enemy. And more importantly, we'll be covering, the likely target locations here in the UK, which is going to be sort of important to some of you. It's nice to know, if you live anywhere near a possible potential target. We'll also look at some of the dangers caused by such attacks in those areas. We'll cover a bit about missiles because alongside, a cyber attack, that is more likely to happen. And we'll also cover defence and deterrent measures currently in place by the UK government. So basically, we'll be looking at how would the UK defend itself from such attacks. I've identified 40 possible targets here in the UK, and we'll go through that list sort of quickly at the end, just in case any viewers are living in any of those areas. And guys, I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that you should be sort of considering moving house if you live in sort of one of those areas. As mentioned before, the likelihood of a direct missile attack here in the UK is less likely than, let's say, I don't know, a cyber attack on critical infrastructure, causing outages across water, gas, and electricity sort of providers. But both forms of attack are likely. Or should I say possible? Now, you may be sat there thinking, well, a cyber attack isn't much to worry about. And again, sorry to be a bearer of bad news, but just imagine you and your household sort of going without water and electricity for a week. When I say a week, I'm being generous. And a more sort of deadly attack on the UK could be in the form of an EMP. And that, my friends, should sort of send shivers down your spines. We'll cover them in sort of more detail though during this series. So the world is changing, and the possibility of SHTF situation is higher than ever. What does this mean for me, or to me and my family and the people in the UK? Before looking at prepping, let's first look at sort of the different threats. What types of sort of scenarios do they present? And only then can we sort of begin to look at taking necessary steps. This video will be based on a small but significant set of situations we could sort of find ourselves in, ranging from low to high risks. I've I've said this in a previous video and I'm going to say it again. If you are living in the UK, do not think for 1 minute that you are in a safe place. And also don't be disillusioned in thinking that this country could not be attacked. Because the UK is an island, we're probably less likely to be invaded by an invading force. We're not likely to see sort of tanks on our streets nor artillery shells landing in our back gardens. However, what we're more likely to see and more likely to receive are attacks in the form of missiles. So with that in mind, I will be speaking just a little bit about missiles, the different types, the risks, the threats, and impacts to you and your families if that was to happen. What I will be doing is I'm going to be sort of throwing up some slides throughout this session, just to give you some sort of details on whether it's the missiles, defense and deterrent, and the possible targets. Whilst I'm sort of introducing the missile threat, I want to say that I believe a missile threat is more likely launched from a submarine. And I will be having a discussion on the UK sort of threat from submarines on another video. The reason being is because I want to be sort of specific to that. I want to be sort of specific about that threat, and just get you guys to sort of understand how um, where does that sort of risk sort of sit in the pecking order. What I'm trying to say here is I want to emphasize how important it is for you guys to know and understand that that submarine threat from, let's say, for instance, Russia, is very, very high. So I just want to, sort of concentrate on that on a short 10-minute video, which will be shortly after this one. We can't talk about possible attacks from an enemy without talking about the one question on everyone's mind, and that is, how does the UK sort of defend itself from such attacks? Many of you will not be aware of the UK's defence and deterrent procedures, operations, and systems, so I'll provide you with a very high sort of overview on that. We are going to start with a low risk. So, starting with a low risk sort of scenario to the UK. A low risk scenario is already happening and is evident today. With the conflict between, let's say, Israel and Hamas, we're seeing protests and clashes between law enforcement and protesters. With that, we should also sort of expect the terrorists' threat level in the UK certainly to go up. Moving across to the war in the Ukraine, a country very close to European sort of borders and only sort of 1,400 miles away from us here in Britain. And that conflict is currently a low risk to Great Britain, but it could easily, quite quickly, become a medium to high risk situation. Starting with the low risk, that being things like economic consequences of the war for sort of UK households. We are seeing higher commodity prices and trade sort of spillovers. Increased uncertainty weighing on confidence also has the potential to sort of further reduce growth in this country. High inflation, both directly as a result of higher commodity prices and indirectly through increased unit costs, will both add to the squeeze on real household incomes. So a low risk could be sort of something like a war and conflict in other parts of the world, excluding the UK. Possible impact. That could be things like supply chains, shipping, flights, road and rail transportation affecting the movement of everyday goods and products entering the UK. This could cause a limitation on certain products, followed by a storage shortage and ultimately hikes in prices. We currently have a very fragile global trading system at the moment. And like I pointed out, the UK is less exposed to, I don't know, direct effects of that war compared to many of its European sort of neighbours, and it's by no means immune. We have already seen pressure on prices, particularly energy and food. UK prices are already sort of squeezed by labour shortages, a slow post-pandemic recovery of the effects of Brexit. But let's stick to the current war and conflict, shall we? Now, I've worked in the IT industry for about 20, 25 years. And I used to always say that it was one of the safest and most secure industries out there because absolutely everyone and sort of everything relies on an IT infrastructure of some sorts. I finished a contract on the 31st of December, 2023, and I've not been able to lock down a new contract since then. I started to look inward, as you naturally do, and think that maybe it's me, my CV, or even my age. So with that, I emailed nearly 100 recruitment agencies, and I asked them just to take a look at, my CV and ask them if the market, was sort of slow in general. They came back to me and they said, listen, it's definitely not you or your CV. They said there's so much uncertainty in the economy right now, with businesses re-strategizing. This meant businesses are not sort of committing themselves financially as they've been used to, and maybe thinking about scaling some of their operations back. So with that, we are definitely feeling, as a family, we are definitely feeling the pinch and noticing the cost of living crisis. But we're survivors as a family, so we'll get through it. I'm still not shocked, but I am still sort of taken back actually to see people just going through their lives as normal as if nothing's wrong. And maybe that is the case for them, but it just seems that people are, plowing through life as if everything's sort of fine and normal. Unfortunately, I believe it's going to get a lot worse. When you have our Prime Minister saying that the UK is now on a war footing, and only recently, yeah, Vladimir Putin sort of threatened the UK directly with attacks. Then it's those comments along with hundreds of other comments made by other officials across the world, over the last few months. It just seems to be telling a completely different story. So picking up from where I left off, we don't have to be sort of involved in a conflict or war to feel the impact of that war, should we say, in many parts of the world. The worrying aspect to observe here right now are the wars and conflicts currently brewing up, certainly those that are brewing up in Europe. And we're also seeing the three superpowers of the world preparing for war, making many, many threats to each other. And you can see sort of military assets and military postures changing on a daily basis. I'm just not sure how much more information people need to realize what's going on. As mentioned in previous videos, general publics are aware of the wars and tensions, but I think at least sort of 80% of these people just don't or won't believe that any of it will sort of affect them here in the UK. And as mentioned just now, the cost of living is in the most part is sort of caused because of the tensions around the world. But to even suggest that the UK could be attacked, well, don't be absurd. This would never, this is never going to happen. Chuckle, chuckle. And the problem is that just because you have never experienced war and conflict during your lifetime and have only heard about World War One and World War Two does not mean it's never going to happen here and never going to happen again. We, as a civilization, we're certainly here in this country, have kind of had it easy-ish. The country as a whole has become soft. People are labeling themselves with all kinds of problems. Mental health has exploded in the UK. The system has done this really to the people, weakening the population and making sure that they sort of become more reliant on the government. And of course, for the government, it's easier for them to control the masses if they have them in the palms of their hands. So with that, I just want to say that if you think that you're sitting in a safe place in this country and the whole world around you is getting along fine, then you kind of need to have a word with yourself. As mentioned during my introduction video, this is going to be a kind of no bullshit channel. I want to get straight to the point, and I'm only doing so just to help you guys out, because quite frankly, I think we're running out of time. I still sometimes find myself, sat here thinking, are these threats real? Is any of this really going to happen? Or is it likely to happen? Is the UK really in danger? And for me, I mean, I've been tracking the Ukraine war for over 800 days now, on a daily basis, as well as sort of tracking other potential conflicts around the world. But I still find myself sometimes questioning it all. And that is the normality bias. And that is, that's very dangerous. It's a very dangerous trait to sort of have, really. So if you have it, then, shake it off as quickly as you can. And I hope to sort of help some of you, do this throughout this video and other videos coming up. Right, enough of my bullshit about what I think. This video is supposed to be about the real risks of conflict to the UK and its population. Now, most of you out there, simply don't believe that, a world war is likely to happen whilst you're alive, shall we say. Consumed by all of those day-to-day sort of activities, and the bullshit of life easily masks the truth. And sorry to be, that bearer of bad news, but you need to get that thought out of your heads. I'm not saying for 1 minute that, these things will definitely happen. But then I believe World War III has already started. I don't, definitively know the answers to some of these questions. And if I did, I probably wouldn't be sat here talking about it, and would instead be sat amongst, I don't know, colleagues in government, intelligence, and military generals, because they will have the answers to most of these questions. Going back to conflict in other parts of the world affecting us here in the UK, at this point, we may only be concerned about perishable goods such as food, medication, and toiletries. We will need to prepare before the government implements enforcement measures, and then with that, we'll see the panic buying kicking off. An example of this could be the Houthi rebels in Yemen attacking container cargo ships, in busy shipping lanes, forcing many of those commercial ships to choose safer routes, to their destinations, thus taking longer for the goods to sort of reach their destinations and ultimately hiking up the prices. Now, although Yemen is, 3,700 miles away from the UK, we can still feel the effects of that conflict happening there. And for me, this would fall into a low risk category. Moving on to medium risks. This could be an attack on, let's say, a European country, such as, let's say, Russia attacking a NATO country, excluding the UK. So that's not the UK, that's anywhere else in Europe. It could come, and most likely in the form of a missile attack or even a cyber attack on critical infrastructure. The tensions around the Baltics is at its highest since World War II. If you're not familiar with the Baltics, they're countries closest to the Russian border: Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, and Finland. All of those countries are NATO members and are all closest to the Baltic Sea. This could happen quite quickly and with little prior warning. So, such an act could, again, trigger panic buying. But then, I'm not even sure about that. I think, for many people, unless, I don't know, they see the UK sort of being attacked directly, there's nothing to worry about, I suppose. Until, of course, when the hype sort of boils over onto mainstream news and social media platforms. So an attack on a European country should no doubt send, the masses into fear. So be ready for some of that also. And because these countries are NATO members, they are allies, and therefore an attack on one NATO country is an attack on all. The potential flashpoints in that region right now will be between Poland, Lithuania, and Latvia, who are readying themselves with possible conflict against Belarus. As I've mentioned previously, Russia have deployed nuclear weapons to Belarus. Poland have requested to be part of the nuclear sharing umbrella in Europe, meaning that they would receive nuclear weapons as part of the of that sort of sharing policy. Hundreds of thousands of troops are building up in these areas. NATO are going to make sure that the Suwalki Gap is sort of kept under NATO control and doesn't fall into the hands of Russia. And there's talk of Russia eyeing up other parts of Europe, such as Estonia and islands in the Baltic Sea, I believe. Putting that aside, it is only going to take Russia to attack one of the 32 sort of NATO member states, and that will be it. Your new world war is upon us. The chess pieces are pretty much or nearly already in place, as those assets have been sort of repositioning over the last 1 to 2 years since the invasion of Ukraine. So I'll say it again, if you think this is not likely to sort of happen, then you better think again. But with that, or with this knowledge, should we say, comes power. because there are so many people dismissing these claims and presenting false flag, not false flags, but what they're doing is kind of masking or even pretending that everything is all right for you. If you are at the very least aware of these threats, as I keep saying, then you can start to prepare yourself, both physically and mentally. And that, my friends, is the sole reason really for me kicking off this channel. Immediate considerations, if there's an attack in Europe, you'll need to be asking these immediate questions. So which country has been attacked? From that, you can or we can gauge how far away or how near to the UK that attack is. What type of attack are we talking about here? What damage has been caused? And more importantly, what is the likely response going to be? So, for example, this could be a missile attack on a civilian location, a military installation, or a tactical nuke on a government building, all now being very plausible. So, although the Ukraine is only 1,400 miles away from the UK, that is, the conflict at the moment is not a risk to the UK directly. However, I would say that the Ukraine war, coupled with other conflicts, has an effect on the global economy, certainly. And therefore, things like the cost of living does go up. Uncertainty across the region and sort of surrounding countries presents many other challenges. The uncertainty brings with it sort of possible business impacts, such as, I don't know, companies struggling to conduct business across Europe. That in turn will affect jobs and employment opportunities. Financial commitments into business could be taking a hit while sort of investors and business owners regroup and re-strategize on, what and where the company is likely to go. And that, ladies and gents, could be what I'm sort of experiencing directly within the IT industry when I'm sort of struggling to secure sort of more work or a new contract right now. That's the kind of feeling I'm getting. It's the market is very, very quiet compared to any other time, in previous years. And not only is the uncertainty in the economy, I just think that there are CEOs, investors, all sat in boardrooms around a conference table, and they are discussing, the potential all-out war in Europe and how that's going to impact them, in terms of, their business models. So, I just wanted to sort of mention that really. A direct attack on a European NATO country, sort of excluding the UK, changes everything really, and it presents a new level of risks and challenges. This type of act sort of would be a medium risk or threat, but that would also sort of depend on which country has been hit. If it is a sort of country closer to the UK, then the risk level may sort of move from that medium to high level. But again, that depends on the type of attack and also the impact of the attack. Finally, for a medium risk, I've just added this note sort of this morning because it wasn't until I was sort of thinking about the current threats unfolding sort of in Europe and the likelihood of a tactical nuke being used, it sort of got me thinking about fallout. Whilst I was going through some nuke map examples this morning, I started thinking about the bigger picture. Of course, if a nuke is detonated in Estonia, Ukraine, or even Poland, then the short-term impact from the actual missile would not affect the UK. However, if that missile is a ground burst and kicks up, some fallout cloud, then I would expect, as a precaution across Europe, that governments would release some, I don't know, form of protocol to the public. With radioactive fallout floating around a couple of miles up in the air, one would sort of think that certain on-the-ground actions and procedures are automatically triggered. This could mean, the immediate closure of businesses, whether that be in the retail sector, the corporate world, but certainly for any, people or profession that's involved in working outside. But who knows? If, for example, the fallout cloud is traveling towards the UK, there's some of the considerations would be around contamination. That could mean water in our lakes, rivers and reservoirs. That could be the food being grown by the UK farmers, livestock roaming around outside in the UK countryside, and of course, contaminating people. So straight away, you can see not what, but straight away from that, you're going to have sort of water and food supplies compromised. And this would be the same for any country likely to receive some of that fallout when it sort of descends from the sky onto the land. If that happens in a country where the UK relies on its food supplies, then we would expect an instant impact to our economy. So, you could see where I'm going with all of this. We need to have the ability to sort of look at the bigger picture. And we can only sort of do that if we understand those threats and impacts. In such situations as a prepper, you have to try and adopt the art of taking quite a few steps back and looking at the events, the scenarios, and the situations from the outside in, so that you can easily assess the potential damage, therefore allowing yourselves to make better sort of decisions and being better prepared. I hope with these up and coming videos, I just hope to be able to sort of provide you with some of these skills throughout, throughout these videos. I'm new to YouTube. This is all new to me, so I want to be I want to be precise with the information that I'm giving you, and I want to be straight to the point. I actually don't want to be beating around the bush or pretending things aren't happening. Like I say, I don't know what's going to happen. I'm not in the same room as these people when they're making the decision, but I'm just gauging it by what I'm sort of seeing and hearing. Now, moving on to the most important risk of all. Before talking about the risk or the risks, there's going to be more than one risk here to us in the UK. We need to ask ourselves, why would we, or are we now, a target for the Russians? In this video, I'll be going through all of the primary targets and their locations here in the UK. And from that, you'll then sort of be able to see why the UK becomes a target. The UK is strategically positioned, certainly, for this war currently sort of unfolding in Europe. We are close enough to sort of stage military operations, shall I say, but far away enough to avoid an immediate attack or target, or to be an immediate target. What I mean is that this country doesn't border or have borders with Russia, so we're an island. We're just that bit further away. And both France and the UK are, unfortunately near to the top of the list of targets for Russia, which is, likely trying to get worse as this conflict unfolds. Don't be mistaken though, guys. The UK is a target, and with that, we have to expect, plan, and prepare for all possibilities. The East will look at the UK as being a mini US because we live inside each other's pockets, to be fair, and are very close allies. An attack on US soil, let's say from Russia, would that'd be fairly difficult. Hence the reason why they're throwing weapons up into space, so to gain some kind of future advantage. So the next best thing would be to hit the UK. Anyway, let's just look at a high risk incident or threat. This would be a direct attack on the UK, whether that be a cyber attack, a conventional attack, or a tactical strike. Again, damage and severity of that attack will have to be quickly assessed to determine other threats, who was responsible, and the next steps to be taken. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Russia only recently threatened the UK that if Ukraine uses British-made sort of missiles, that being the Shadow missiles, sorry, on targets in Russia, then they will attack British military targets. In this video, I'm going to be sort of covering all of the possible targets for an attack here in the UK. So if you live in any of those areas, you may want to be considering those threats probably a little bit more seriously than, let's say, somebody living outside of those areas. A direct attack on the UK is a high-level incident for the United Kingdom, but considerations would have to be sort of based on the type of attack, the impact, and the damage caused. So with that, I'm going to just go through the types of attacks to sort of consider, of which there are four. There's a conventional missile attack. This is a missile that's packed with explosives and used to cause sort of damage to assets on the ground. You've then got a tactical nuke, which is packed with one or more warheads, each containing an NBC or nuclear biological chemical payload. This means the radioactive material and explosives causing, sort of damage from the initial blast, and also damage caused from the radioactive sort of fallout descending from the sort of the air or the sky following the initial explosion. You've then got an EMP missile. That's also packed with explosives, but it's designed to explode above the target and not on the ground, so it's better known as an airburst. This would send a powerful sort of shock wave, which is designed normally to disable the electricity grid and attached equipment. Also, power stations, communication facilities, towers and masts, and also utility providers. And then finally, you've got a cyber attack. These are conducted normally by computer hackers who sort of infiltrate computer systems and networks with viruses. This gives them the ability to take control of the systems and services, then shut the services down, such as the banking system, utility providers such as water, gas, and electricity, just to name a few. Cyber attacks can, target any endpoints across critical infrastructure, which relies on computers or servers or networks and IT operations. So pretty much all companies, organizations, platforms, arenas, corporations, and the list goes on. Only recently here in the UK, it was reported that the Chinese had hacked the MOD or the Ministry of Defense. Embarrassing, I know, but highlights vulnerabilities even at government level infrastructure. So the threat of a cyber attack is real, and we'll cover those in other videos. Missile details. Now, a missile to most obviously resembles something that looks like a rocket, and you'll be right. But it's important to understand what is packed inside these rockets. So with the missile details, I just want to sort of explain some of the characteristics of a missile, which will allow you to sort of better understand the potential damage and therefore the risks to you and your family. The missile yield. This is how much explosive material, normally in the form of TNT, is packed into the missile and its warheads, normally measured in kilotons or megatons. You've then got the ignition type. There are two types actually that I'll be talking about mostly. Well, there's three types, but I'll be talking mostly about the two types during this content. That's going to be a ground burst or an air burst missile. A ground burst missile, like I've said, will explode when hitting the ground, and an air burst missile will explode in the air before hitting the ground. So it's important to understand also the types of missiles used to be able to sort of measure the potential damage, and with that, your next action. So you'll also be able to sort of assess how to mitigate those risks and vulnerabilities surrounding such events for you, your family, friends, or anyone else that you're responsible for. Before I sort of give you these two examples, let me just point out a fact here that will sort of help you understand the missile yield. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan by the US, I think it was in August 1945, were ground burst detonations and killed 129,000 plus 226,000 people, most of whom were sort of civilians. The yield of the Hiroshima bomb was 15 kilotons. That's 15 kilotons. That is the equivalent of 15,000 tons of TNT, and the Nagasaki bomb contained 25 kilotons or 25 kiloton warhead. Now, for this example, if a 150 kiloton tactical nuke but a ground burst missile hits a certain target, how does that affect me? Or if a 150 kiloton conventional air burst missile hits a certain location, what impact would that have on you? If you guys have, if you guys have already sort of switched off, then not to worry. It's not for me to make you sort of interested in this content, but understanding the threat will enable you to make immediate, decisive, and life-saving decisions. And more importantly, I mentioned in a previous video that people's interpretation of nuclear war or nuclear weapons and radiation means the end of the world to them. And, that actually isn't true. And there's many of those myths out there that we can sort of get dismissed during this video and up and coming videos. I'm saying this because I actually thought the same only, what, 2 years ago. But once I sort of started to research exactly what these threats were and what they meant to me and my family, it isn't actually as bad as everyone makes out. Don't get me wrong, nuclear war, isn't great, but the severity of an attack has to be sort of considered before one consider the end of days. Do I think a nuclear missile, will be launched during the Russian-Ukraine war? Sadly, yes, but I believe it's going to be a tactical nuke and not a conventional nuke. Tactical nukes have a more specific set of targets, whether that be military bases or similar, and they tend to have a lot smaller sort of warhead than, let's say, that of a conventional nuke, and therefore smaller yields, presenting smaller fallout clouds, resulting in a lessened impact. A conventional nuke is normally a lot bigger, and it will be those missiles that you'll have ingrained onto your minds, with a much larger warhead and yield, and therefore a lot more devastating effects. Those are the ones you're sort of used to seeing on the front of magazines across social media platforms, the mainstream news outlets. You'll see, the likes of Russia and China, as well as other countries, exhibiting these large intercontinental ballistic missiles on the back of an 18-wheeler mobile launcher through their capital cities on a national victory day in those countries. So if those missiles are being launched, then yes, we could have a different set of circumstances to consider. Just quickly, cruise missiles and classifications. I'm just going to sort of go through these kind of quite quickly. A strategic missile, often classified into cruise or ballistic missiles. A ballistic missile is powered by rockets and tends to sort of follow a trajectory to reach its intended target. Cruise missiles are sort of continuously powered by jet engines, and they actually travel at a flatter trajectory. Ballistic missiles are categorized based on range. Tactical missiles are categorized based on their launch platforms, of which there are seven main ones. You have the surface-to-air, ground-based launched missiles, which kind of take out targets in the air, basically. So they're launched from the ground, and they are sort of, sent to take out, I don't know, targets in the air, whether that's planes, jets, or any other UAV. Commonly used for defense systems to take out incoming missiles, planes, and other airborne vehicles. You've then got a surface-to-surface missile, which is launched from the ground, whether that be a static or mobile launch facility, with an intended target also on the ground, such as buildings, vehicles, and people. You've then got an air-to-air, probably more commonly or more sort of common when we think about fighter jets that are in the air taking out other fighter jets or other aircraft, whether that be enemy jets, other military aircraft, drones, and of course the odd balloon. We've got air to surface, so seen a lot being used in the Ukraine at the moment with airborne drones sort of taking out military assets on the ground. So that could be tanks, buildings, and soldiers. Or this method can include bombs being dropped from bombers onto their intended targets on the ground. And then you've got anti-ship, anti-tank, and anti-air satellite. These are missiles designed just to take out those three types of assets. We then have long-range subsonic missiles. A subsonic missile has a range of about 100 kilometers with speeds of up to 800 kilometers per hour. Then we've then got an intercontinental supersonic, which just has longer ranges. The supersonic travels faster than the speed of sound with a range between 100 to 500 kilometers. And then the most concerning of all is the hypersonic missile. 2 to 25 times the speed of sound it travels at. So that is kind of traveling between 1 and 5 miles per second, which is, that's crazy shit, guys. Now, you might be sort of looking at these missile ranges and thinking, If these missiles are launched from Russia, then the hypersonic is feasible. But remember, Russia has a nuclear triad, meaning it can launch nuclear missiles or normal missiles actually from various different launch pads, from Russian ground silos or mobile carriers, from jets or bombers in the air, and also submarines that could be sort of sat off the coast of, I don't know, Cornwall, Ireland, or Scotland, or anywhere in the UK, meaning they're now sort of in range of any target here in the UK. So let's also not forget the launching of missiles from space. So the nuclear sort of triad status may change its name with the introduction of those, those space launch sort of missiles. Whilst understanding different types of the different types of missiles and categories, it's important to sort of understand and identify the different types and locations of possible UK targets. Now, this next piece of information is probably going to be one of the most important parts for most of you if you're living in the UK. I'm going to tell you or provide you with a list of likely primary targets here in the UK that, I don't know, someone like Russia is likely to be looking at. Just one note on this before we move on. I've mentioned a couple of times not advertising, advising you not to be, complacent and think that the UK, would not be a target and therefore not likely to be attacked. Is it likely? Yes, it could be. But how likely? Some of you will be asking that question, really. I'm no longer in the military, so I haven't got answers to those sort of questions, really, I'm afraid. There are a couple of reasons I can point out for, someone like Putin to attack the UK. Firstly, we live in the pockets of the US, who, we're very close allies with. We have actually sort of been at war with Russia since before World War One, but that's sort of in terms of the government and the Secret Service and spy war, really. So not a conventional war, but we've been in conflict with them for many, many years. But more recently, the UK have been providing the Ukraine with long-range Storm Shadow sort of missiles, which they've sort of proven to be very effective and successful in taking out Russian targets on the ground over there. We've had Putin recently sort of threaten the UK directly with attacks. The UK are, orchestrating many movements on the ground alongside other NATO allies, helping, the Ukraine to sort of plan and execute missions and operations. Russia, see the UK as probably one of the direct instigators in supporting the Ukraine. And there will be many other reasons why the UK, will now be in Putin's crosshairs. So enough of the politics, though, and the ifs, buts, and maybes. Let's just move on. The UK, in comparison to many other neighbours, is a small island with a population of around, what is it, 69 million, something like that. If you're the enemy, you're going to be sort of looking at types of targets, of which there are two main types. We've got what we call a counterforce target. These are military targets. And then we've got counter value targets, which are sort of commercial buildings, infrastructure, economic, and the population. So a counterforce target is going to be targets such as military bases, naval military docks and ports, air traffic control, communication stations, intelligence sites, military sort of command and control, HQs or headquarters, military barracks even, military logistics in terms of storage and other similar sites. Counter value targets. These targets are places such as oil refineries, major commercial ports and shipping container yards. Transport links could include the Eurotunnel, airports and ferry ports. Then there's the tier one sort of data centers, which host thousands of servers providing infrastructure, commercial, business and financial services for businesses around the world. Then there are government buildings such as GCHQ, MI5, MI6, Parliament, Scotland Yard. We've got the Secret Intelligence Service, which is Thames House. And you've also got DI or Defence Intelligence. those would be considered counter value targets, so kind of non-military. Just a quick sort of example on this actually. The Ukraine attacked a few days ago, a Russian occupied town of Kerch in Crimea, whereby the Ukrainians actually took out the Kerch ferry service by sinking one or two ships. This is classed as a counter value target, so non-military, but probably taken out because those ferries would have been used to ferry sort of Russian military equipment and personnel around. And then a few days before that, Ukraine took out a Russian military radar facility in Russia. So this would be sort of considered a counter force target, meaning a military target. So that was just kind of an example. I can't give you a UK example really, but it's an example of real-time news. Once we've identified many or most of the likely, and I say likely in capital letters, targets, we can then sort of look at the type of missiles likely to be used and also the sort of possible yield expected to take out its intended target. The yield and the type together provides us with the initial impact and likely sort of estimated damage, and more importantly, the fallout possibilities. So that really depends on the type of missile it is. Before I list these potential UK targets, we must remember that I've only identified these targets based on rationale, meaning if I was at war and in control of target decision making, then I would sort of be looking at these targets. Such targets are identified through sort of military sort of strategies and decisions, and some of those decisions have to be based on rationale of the person making them. If, for example, you are an unstable warlord or a prime minister or even, a president who has a kind of a particular hate for his or her enemy, then sort of taking out civilians intentionally is always possible. We have seen, in the Ukraine with Russia taking out civilian targets, including schools, shopping centers, and hospitals. Of course, there are always going to be sort of innocent casualties of war, but if your enemy doesn't even like the race or nationality of its target, then all bets are off. It wouldn't matter where, where in the UK you live. It's a free for all, and anyone's a target. Other examples evident today, actually, being seen in the war with or between sort of Israel and Hamas. Thousands of innocent sort of people are being killed in that conflict. And we could go back to World War II, where millions of innocent Jews were wiped off the face of the earth. So again, these are things that have already happened in the past. They're happening now and will continue to happen. The question for this video is, though, is it likely to happen to us here in the UK? And I wonder how many of you said no just then to that question. Likely, it's not a word to be taken lightly, shall we say. If something as serious as the topics spoken about sort of today are likely, then we better start sort of taking them seriously. I've used an online software tool called NukeMap for this part of the video to determine impacts from sort of attacks on possible UK targets. So for this final section of the video, I want to sort of emphasize the impact of nuclear missiles used against the UK. This would be a worst case scenario for us. But I have to sort of also consider EMP missiles or detonations. Both attacks of this nature, would bring sort of with them their own sort of devastating set of risks and damages. I just want to put this second disclaimer out there before people start getting carried away, panicking, or just going off on one. I'm going to say it again. Listen, the UK can be targeted and can be attacked by a missile. Do not automatically assume that because I'm talking about or using the term nuke or nuclear, I'm simply referring to the end of the world, the apocalypse, the end of days as we know it, or any other madness. I mentioned at the beginning of this video that until you fully understand the threats, you're never going to know your vulnerabilities, your impacts, and the options that you have. Please don't think that if a 150 kiloton tactical nuke was to hit a UK target somewhere, that everyone in the UK is finished, as that couldn't be any further from the truth. So whilst I want to sort of pull people away from this normality bias, I also want to sort of dismiss all of those nuclear weapon and nuclear war myths by providing you with some facts. And believe me, it's nowhere near as bad as many people make out. Of course, if the enemy launched 1,000 missiles at the UK, then you know that would present us with a completely set of circumstances. Right. Before I go on, actually, just for 1 minute, I just want to play the part of that enemy commander in chief or whoever it is that's responsible for deciding which targets to take out. A strategist, they're going to have to put themselves in the shoes of the enemy. So I'm going to do exactly that. Let's just say, for example, I'm Putin or his commander in chief. The reason why the UK is a potential target in my eyes is because the UK are helping the Ukraine to take out critical Russian targets, in both the Ukraine and more importantly inside Russia. So my initial beef is going to be with the UK government and not necessarily the British people. However, if I was really Putin, then I wouldn't give a damn about human lives, as I'm happy to sort of lose over 1,000 of my own men on the sort of front lines every day. And I, as Putin, hate the Ukrainian people. So for this little example, I'm not going to be targeting the UK people or the civilian population as such. First and foremost, I have to identify when I'm still talking from the shoes of the enemy. I have to identify the targets that are a threat to me in Russia. So ultimately, this is going to be counterforce targets in the UK. That's being military bases. And I'm going to start with the air bases. I'm going to be identifying the air bases in the UK. Most of the fighter jets based in the UK are capable of carrying nuclear missiles. And then there are the bombers, which obviously they can carry a whole array of bombs and missiles. But before taking them out, I've got to be looking at the UK itself, or as a country, identifying my incoming missiles first. That being remote radar stations, communication sites, and intelligence locations. So I'm going to be looking at hitting them potentially first, followed by the air bases. Now, I'm obviously only speculating here, but we have to be able to sort of put ourselves into the shoes of the enemy to even begin to understand these potential threats. With that, I have to look at the UK's deterrent to a missile attack from Russia, shall we say, first, as that platform will prevent me from winning any successful strikes. And there's no point in me sort of going on without first explaining the UK's defence and deterrent platform. Now, before we move on to sort of different scenarios those attacks would present, I know many sort of people are going to be asking about the UK's deployed defense infrastructure and systems for such attacks. The UK does not have what is better known as a nuclear triad, like the US and other superpowers have. A nuclear triad, in short, is the ability to launch nuclear missiles from either land, sea, or air. This would mean, for example, being able to launch nuclear missiles from the mainland, normally launched from sort of silos in the ground or mobile launchers, or missiles being launched from the sea, from submarines, or launching nuclear missiles from the air. So, for example, launch from either large bombers such as, the B-1, B-2, B-52, or B-21, if you're American or British or NATO, or launch from fighter jets, and not forgetting the possibility of satellites. The UK can only sort of deploy ballistic nuclear missiles from its submarines, of which there are, well, there's 11. There's 11. Right. So there's four ballistic missile submarines out of the 11 submarines in total. We don't have launch sites in the UK to launch such weapons of mass destruction. However, the UK does have sort of various fighter jets amongst the RAF or US Air Force bases that are capable of carrying nuclear weapons, such as the F-35, F-35B or F-35A and B. of which there are 34 in service. The UK also operates surface to air defense systems, meaning, there are sort of missile defense systems on land and also deployed from the Navy's anti-air guided missile destroyers, which are the Type 45 Daring class, of which there are 6 destroyers operational, I think. The Royal Navy uses a platform called the Sea Viper, which is a guided weapon 45 system, also known as the PAMS, or Principal Air Anti-Missile System. There is the Sea Scepter, another guided weapon system. Then there's the Phalanx B, which is a close-in sort of weapon system. Then there are sort of smaller caliber, sort of 30mm DS-30B cannons and the 30mm automatic small caliber gun, which is a Mark 1.5. The British Army have the Sky Sabre high velocity missiles and the Land Environment Air Picture Provision Air Defense Systems deployed, and the RAF will be using various air-to-air and advanced medium-range air-to-air missiles, as well as the air-to-air cannons. So in a nutshell, if anyone asks you if and how or what defense systems does the UK have in place to combat attacks from the air, you can now tell them. However, many of these sort of systems have not been tested against an attack on the UK, and there are going to be some missiles, such as hypersonic missiles, that move, so fast. I'm not sure whether those listed defense systems are able to intercept them or not. I don't have those metrics or those details. Hypersonic missiles, like I said, travel at sort of 5 times or 5 times sort of faster than the speed of sound, and the British sort of more vulnerable than ever to a nuclear strike ordered by the Kremlin now. Hypersonic missiles, they're more difficult to detect, track, and intercept than existing sort of ballistic missiles, which sort of don't travel anywhere near as fast. Now then, the following locations are possible UK targets, and distances are accurate to within 500 meters. I have chosen a home location, not my home location, just a home location. For this example, located in the Midlands or in the middle of the UK or near to. That being, where was it? Coventry in the Midlands. The below sort of possible targets that I'm going to show on these slides are sort of the top 10 targets closest to the Midlands, or this, is it a city? I think it's the city of Coventry. These are all counter force targets, meaning military targets, and are going to be sort of the most likely. So let's say, for instance, you live in the Midlands or you live in Coventry. These next 10 locations that I'm going to show you are ones to consider. We've got RAF Barford, St John, Oxford. That's 30 miles away. It's a non-flying facility, but it's now a communication centre. We have RAF Crawton in Buckinghamshire, 34 miles away. It's a US Air Force communications station. Primary target, without a doubt. We have HMS Forward, Century Park in Birmingham. That's 37 miles away. It's a training establishment. Now, I'm not sure whether that's actually a primary target, but it's a counter force target, not far from Coventry. You've then got RAF Bryce Norton, quite a well-known airbase in Oxford or Oxfordshire, 51 miles away. It's an air mobility force, and I believe there's something like 6,000 personnel working out of there. I'm not too sure about that, actually, Bryce Norton. Don't hold me to that 6,000 personnel. The reason being is because I'm hearing the same numbers from RAF Mildenhall and RAF Lakenheath, so I'm not sure which one has 6,000 personnel. I'll find out for you. RAF Wittering in Peterborough, 52 miles away. The reason why I'm telling you these miles is because what we're going to be doing is I'm going to show you if a certain type of missile is detonated either above these places or on the ground, you're going to be able to see whether you're going to be impacted or you're in danger if you live in Coventry. RAF Wittering, Peterborough, 52 miles away. It's a main operating base and headquarters. You've got RAF Molesworth or Alconbury, which is in Huntingdon. That is 55 miles away. It's a combat support wing. It's a ground launch cruise missiles and also intelligence are definitely a primary target. RAF Wyton. This is in Huntingdon, 55 miles away. It's a strategic command station. RAF Fairford, which is Oxfordshire again, 57 miles away. It's a forward operating location. It has or houses or operates heavy bombers and the bomber task force out of there. So 100% a primary target. You've got RAF Casford. This is in Wolverhampton Wolverhampton area. That's 58 miles away. It's a technical training defence college. I don't think that is a primary target. A little bit like HMS Forward. It's a training establishment. There's no real gain in taking those two out. And I've added this next one into the list because of the type of target it is under the circumstances. It's the NATO Allied Maritime Command in Northwood, London. That's 70 miles away. But regardless of the distance, it's a NATO multinational HQ and Central Command. So I just wanted to sort of throw that in there. The following list are other sort of possible counter-force targets here in the UK. We won't be discussing damage statistics on these slides, as well, as well as any of the simulated facts that will be sort of shown. So I will be doing a second part video to this, which is going to follow this, is what I mean. So there's going to be a second video to this, and what we're going to do is we will bring up Nuke Map and we will actually simulate certain missile types or certain missile types and yields in some of these locations, and we are going to just have a look at what those potential threats and risks are. So if you live in any of those areas, it's going to be cool. I'm going to show you how to use Nuke Map, so you guys can go off, bring up Nuke Map, and kind of check it yourself, really, because I don't know where you guys live. Guys, I don't know if these threats are likely to happen, and are these threats real? Of course they are. All countries have threat levels to all sorts of conflict and disasters. I'm just sort of merely pointing out to you, based on the information published and received, that the threats discussed in this video are at their highest level since, I don't know, World War II. So for me, that's enough reason for me to prepare and protect my family, and also when possible, relay this information on to my friends and also the viewers. Okay, these are other counter-force targets here in the UK. So if there's in total, how many is there? So I don't know how many I've just gone through there, but there's approximately sort of 30 counter-force or military targets to consider. I'm not going through all of those. I'm just going to go through another 5, 6, 7, because they are primary targets, definitely. So if you live in any of these areas, just take note. We're going to start off with RAF Flyingdales. Now, what you can see here, firstly, RAF Flyingdales, if we're talking about Coventry, again, it's 185 miles away. So, it's a radar base in North Yorkshire. Now, I'm just going to tell you quickly what you're seeing on the screen. This is simulating an airburst missile that's exploded above this military base. Those rings or those circles are radiuses. If you're within those radiuses, depending on which color, will determine the severity of the damage caused. I'm not going to say any more about that because part 2 of this video will discuss in more detail. Okay, you'll also see a couple of numbers there to the right. That's just telling you, estimated fatalities and injuries if that happened. And this is actually based on a 150 kiloton airburst. Okay, I'm just going to flick through these other locations for you. We've got RAF Benson in Oxford or South Oxfordshire. It's a frontline base and helicopter support. I'm not sure if that is actually a primary target. Helicopters are support, aircraft. So, that's not a direct threat, I don't believe, to let's say Russia. RVF High Wycombe, it's a headquarters air command, so that could be they could be orchestrating all kinds of missions and operations. So that could very well be a primary target. You'll also see from those numbers 46,000 estimated fatalities and 69,000 injuries. I'm guessing in High Wycombe. I don't know High Wycombe, but there must be a high population of people living there. We got RAF Cranwell, Lincolnshire. So that's an RAF officers academy. If you want to take out, a load of officers that are going through training, then fine. But I don't see that as a primary target. We've got RAF Waddington, again in Lincolnshire. It's the RAF's busiest station as a hub of UK intelligence. That's a primary target in my eyes. It's the busiest station as a hub of UK intelligence. So, that says it all. You've got RAF Northolt. This in West London, that's RAF Squadron Station there. Again, you're going to have high numbers in terms of casualties and injuries because London is a highly populated city. Then you've got the US Air Force Mildenhall. That's actually 95 miles away from, where did we say, Coventry in Suffolk. It's a US Air Force forward base, which houses your air refuelers, your Stratoforce aircraft that allow, the refueling of other aircraft in the air. One point to throw into the mix here is that, we have quite a high level presence of US Air Force and other sort of US military personnel based here in the UK, approximately 10,000, with 6,000 of them sort of based at RAF Lakenheath in Suffolk. So the US military personnel here in the UK have access to 11 of our Royal Air Force bases, stretching from Cambridgeshire to Yorkshire, and are sort of officially sort of known as they're known as US Visiting Forces or the USVF. So if you ever see that, that's what that is. RAF Lakenheath is home of the 48th Fighter Wing. So the US Air Force sort of only F-15 fighter wing in Europe, and is the foundation of the US Air Force Europe's combat capability, also known as the Liberty Wing, I believe. There were around, again, like I've just said, 6,000 plus personnel operating out of Lakenheath, which has 75 fighter jets and 600 sort of buildings spanning 727 acres of land. So quite a large base. In December 2023, the first sort of F-35s arrived at RAF Lakenheath, with the number of F-35s based there now between 25 and 50 aircraft. And there are also nuclear weapon storage vaults there, which are currently being upgraded. So 100% a primary target. The F-35 stealth fighter jet is now certified to carry the B-61-12, which is a thermonuclear gravity bomb, which is projected to produce a maximum sort of explosion of around 50 kilotons. So those aircraft can drop those bombs. And with me talking about this, it then sort of highlights the reason why the UK could become, potential target. And people might sort of ask you why, the UK could and would, be a target for countries like Russia, China, and North Korea. And it's for those sort of reasons. So moving on to a couple of other targets here. These, like I say, these are primary targets in my eyes, most of them. The other one, which is not far from Mildenhall, is US Air Force Lakenheath, also in Suffolk, obviously. It's the 48th Fighter Wing, F-35s mainly. You've got RAF Coningsby, which is Lincolnshire, Quick Reaction Alert Station, I believe. So that will be a primary target. You've got RAF Odiham, Odium, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, in Hampshire. It's a heavy lift helicopter wing, so that would be the double propeller Chinooks. Yeah, I don't know. Again, it's a support wing really. So I'm not sure if that's a primary target. I don't know. RAF Honington. That's in Suffolk. That's RAF Force Protection and RAF Police HQ. So they're there to kind of protect the RAF and police it. Is that a primary target? Probably not. RAF Menwith Hill. That's in North Yorkshire. That's a communications and intelligence support services. So that's going to be a primary target because it's communications and intelligence. You've got RAF Marham in Norfolk. It's the 138 Expeditionary Air Wing, one of the main operating bases. We've got RAF Woodvale in Southport, Merseyside. That's air combat support and training. Anything with the training, I don't know if that's a primary target because it's not a primary threat to, let's say, Russia. We have RRH Stackton Wold. That is a remote radar head. Definitely a primary target in Cornwall, without a doubt. We've got, not in Cornwall, sorry. What did I say there? Cornwall, in Yorkshire. The next one is in Cornwall. So that's RRH Portsmouth. Again, another remote radar head or a radar site, if that's what you want to call it. We got RAF Valley in Wales as a flying training school. That's definitely not going to be a primary target. Moving on to the Navy, we've got HM Naval Base Portsmouth. That is home to 2/3 of the Navy's surface ships. We got Her Majesty's Naval Base Devonport. That's in Plymouth. That's a naval operating base, another primary target, as well as Portsmouth. And this, without a doubt, is probably one of the most primary targets in this country. That's going to be HMNB Clyde in Scotland. That's a naval base for the submarine fleet, home to the UK's nuclear weapons and nuclear submarines. So, yeah, that's definitely a primary target. And on top of those, I'm just going to run through 10 counter value targets. But to be honest with you, there's going to be a lot more that you guys can probably add to a list. I'll just spend, I'm going to spend more time later identifying more possible counter value targets for you because I know there's going to be, there's going to be a lot more out there. I've concentrated on the counter force targets really for this video. So we've got Farley Refinery in Southampton. We've got Stanlow Refinery, Ellesmere Port. We've also got the port of Felixstowe. Just talking about those refineries, I mean, Ukraine are taking out Russian refineries one a week, I think, at the moment, which has a massive impact on Russia's economy. The production and the sale of sort of exported oil and gas and things like that has dropped by about sort of 16-17%. That percentage might have changed again. But again, that's the Ukrainians targeting counter value targets in Russia. We have Immingham docks. Again, this is going to be import-export docks. So there's going to be a lot of, trade. So if you can hit these places and affect the country's economy, then you're hitting their infrastructure without hitting any military bases. We have Sovereign House, which is a data center in London. Just quickly, what you can see there, that's slightly different graphic to the one before or the ones before. What that's showing you is you've got those rings there on the pin, which is showing you the areas of damage. But what that's also showing you is a fallout cloud, of which there's sort of 3 different colors. That's showing you really the intensity of the radiation within the cloud and the distance it's going to travel and so forth. I'm not going to go into that because that is in part 2 of this video, but that's just to show you what's happening there. Then we've got Equinix LD5, which is in London. That's another data center. That's a big data center that houses thousands and thousands of servers for some of the country's biggest, corporations and companies. We have a Microsoft Azure data centers. There's one in London and Cardiff. These are housing servers that allow you to access the cloud, Office 365, and all your storage and all the rest of it. The last four, we've got the Houses of Parliament. If Putin wanted to take that out or try to, then that would be a primary target, should we say? We've got MI5, MI6, or sort of CIS HQ. That's Thames House, really, in London. That's your intelligence services. We've got GCHQ in Cheltenham, obviously, again an intelligence hub, should we say? And that's kind of it on those counter value targets. So those, like I say, those potential targets that I've identified here in the UK, with the counter value targets, and again, depending on where you guys live, again, we'll go through the part two of this video. Understand it's an easy website to use, an easy application. There's 2 or 3 bits of information you put in there on the right hand side, and bang, you click the detonate button, and that's it. You'll know exactly, whether you're in a danger area or not. As I've finished this video, I'm going to sort of conclude by saying, fortunately, the United Kingdom is located far away enough from the immediate conflict in Europe to become an immediate target, but close enough to sort of pre-stage military assets and operations. Personally, if this all kicks off, then countries closer to the Ukrainian border are sort of more likely to be hit first. That's not to say that we won't be hit. And if you were to ask me, I believe, it depends on how far Putin wants to escalate this war. And it's, I suppose it all depends, as mentioned, on the type of attack, which country, and what is the impact, meaning the damage caused, and the fatalities. I also believe that a tactical nuke will be used in Europe. And, that could happen if, for example, Ukraine ramp up their attacks on the Russian mainland. Putin, could decide to either use a tactical nuke on a sort of military target in the Ukraine, or he could simply light up the nuclear power station in Zaporizhzhia, which would ultimately result in a catastrophic nuclear disaster, sort of similar to that scene in Chernobyl. And that actually could, quite frankly, sort of stop the war in its tracks temporarily. Otherwise, this could be sort of escalated by Russia, giving Belarus Belarus and sort of Kaliningrad the green light to, let's say, occupy and take the Suwalki Gap, which it's kind of like a demarcation line, approximately 65 kilometers between Belarus and Kaliningrad, but it separates Lithuania and Poland. Unfortunately, for Belarus, they would be completely flattened, I think, by Poland, and very quickly as well. And that would probably sort of see sort of Lithuania going into Kaliningrad, or Belarus might be sort of instructed to go straight into Lithuania, Estonia, or Latvia, which would kick things off anyway. What I'm trying to say here is that there are many flashpoints now possible across the whole of the sort of eastern flank of sort of Europe. And with that, many risks and threats to those countries. So yes, the UK are positioned sort of far away enough for sort of such immediate attacks, but that's still not to say that Putin will, attack anything. Anything can sort of happen that could sort of kick off this new world war. So like I say, I'm not here to sort of scaremonger or anything like that. I'm just trying to give you some facts. The conflict is happening. There's flashpoints all over Europe. The likelihood of some of these locations being hit or attacked is likely. If it's likely, then you need to be sort of taking note of this. And finally, I'm just going to sort of say part two of this video, I will be showing you how to use that nuke map application. Like I said, we will simulate nuclear detonations here in the UK over various counter force and counter value targets, just to see what the impacts that would have on sort of anyone living in those sort of areas or those locations. But guys, that's going to be enough for me. and I'm going to get cracking with part 2 of this video. So I'm off.